everybody. Welcome to this webinar on how we built Contensis.com. My name is Ryan Bromley. I was the marketing representative and one of the content strategists on the original Contensis.com project. And I'm now a product owner responsible for Contensis.com, as well as some other internal projects. With me today as well is John Moore. John, do you want to introduce what you did on the project?
Yep, so I'm a customer success engineer at Zengenti, and my role on the project was to do a lot of the, integrations with some of our existing systems, such as the help desk and cloud dashboard, and also migrate some of the content, such as the documentation from ZenHub over to Contensis.com. And like Ryan, continue to work on Contensis.com, and also some of our other systems and tools that you use, such as the help desk and cloud dashboard.
Thanks, John. So today we're here to talk about how we built Contensis.com, which is the new home for everything Contensis related, from our marketing pages and blog to our user and API documentation and our help desk. We'll also touch on the updates we made to Zengenti.com as well. And we're going to explain why we started the project, which tools and technologies we used, and where we're going to take the project next. In terms of the key takeaways, the things that we're hoping you're going to take away from the webinar, we're hoping you'll learn more about our current processes for developing with content types and entries, find out a bit more how we run a content-first project, and why we think you should use a component-based design system. We're also keen to hear from you as to which areas that we cover in this webinar that you'd like us to go over in more detail in future webinars as well.
So what was the problem? Why did we decide to build this new platform, Contensis.com? Well, in autumn 2019, a new look Contensis app was due in the next 12 to 18 months. So around now or maybe early next year, that was going to look completely different. It was going to be streamlined and consist mostly of the content types and entries features, and it would also be something that we'd aim to offer online, so people could register for an instance of Contensis through Contensis.com and start using the CMS. We also had quite an old suite of websites and support platforms built on technologies that our services team no longer uses. So these were built on classic Contensis, so WYSIWYG page templates, and our services team uses content types and entries and React for building sites now. So we wanted to bring our own sites onto the same tools and technologies that we're using to produce customer websites. Additionally, we wanted to be using the latest Contensis features, which wasn't always possible with these old platforms. It would have required quite a lot of development work just to begin using these new features, and we thought we were better off starting with a fresh instance of Contensis and rebuilding them from the ground up. And we also wanted to move to using more modern development practices so that we could continue to improve our customer experience through this platform once it had launched. So things like source control, continuous integration, and automated testing. So at this point, our existing website was on the Zengenti.com domain, and it was very obviously branded as Zengenti. It was built around 2016 using classic Contensis page templates. And we'd already started to update and rebrand the Contensis pages on the Zengenti website after the introduction of content types and entries in Contensis 9. These were contained in their own area of the site, which seemed very different to the rest of Zengenti.com, as you can see. Our support site, ZenHub, was separate from Zengenti.com, and it contained a wealth of information that wasn't available on Zengenti.com and wouldn't be surfaced in any search. It was again built mostly using classic Contensis pages, apart from a few areas such as the what's new listing, which was built with content types and entries. And this site used quite a complicated sync to sync the documentation for different versions of Contensis that was based on documentation from Contensis 8, and it was becoming quite difficult to maintain the documentation because of this sync. So we really wanted to move on to a single version of documentation on our new site. All of our developer documentation for using content types and entries was hosted in another Gitbook site, which again offered a totally different user experience to the rest of our support. It was branded very differently, and it had none of the navigation from ZenHub. So you could go back to ZenHub, but there was no menu at the top to get to a specific ZenHub page. So it was far from a seamless user experience in that sense. And while we wanted to rebuild these different sites and bring them onto a single platform, we knew that would involve rebuilding our help desk as well, which was based on ZenHub. If we wanted to move away from ZenHub eventually, then the help desk had to be moved to Contentis.com. And this was the front end of our Kayako support system, essentially. So as you can see, we had 4 different designs or brands across these different products. And what we really wanted was a single cohesively branded platform for all Contensis content and services in the future. So what do we do? Well, we put together a squad, which is what we call a cross-functional team. And we aim to follow an agile process as far as we possibly could. Obviously, it was a big project to do in an agile way. So we broke the project down into 3 sort of sub-projects. The first one was what we thought of as marketing content. So everything Contensis related from the existing Zengenti site, such as feature pages, case studies, the pricing page, and blog posts. And then we had the documentation, which was bringing over the user guides that were relevant to content types and entries features from ZenHub, and then combining those with the documentation in Gitbooks for the delivery and management APIs. And then, as I mentioned, there was also the help desk, which we wanted to rebuild and use that rebuild as an opportunity to streamline the process and make it quicker and easier for people to raise tickets, especially critical tickets. And these sub-projects overlapped. So while the marketing content was being designed, the help desk could be prototyped and we could start building that and so on. We started by setting out to understand exactly what was required for each of the sub-projects, while paying particular attention to how we could improve the user experience of each platform that we were rebuilding. So the first thing to do was get an idea of what content we already had, how effective it was, and whether it needed to be migrated, updated, or archived. So we used the reports feature in Contensis to run reports on all of our live content on ZenHub and the Zengenti site. Then we went through this content and did quite a quick analysis to determine whether each piece was going to be migrated to Contensis.com or Zengenti.com, and whether it needed to be rewritten in the process. I'm just going to get a bit of water. I've got a dry mouth. And these decisions mostly came down to our content strategy, but the age of the content and how much traffic it received were also big factors. So you can see we've got drop downs for the kind of traffic each page is getting, as well as drop downs for where we're going to migrate it to, and a area for people to put comments justifying what we were going to do, so that we could refer back to that in the future. And while some of us were doing that, our head of content strategy, Gabriel, also documented our help desk user journey and noted down any areas that he thought it could be streamlined or improved. And this was a really big piece of work. As you can see, it's quite a long document, but it was really useful in helping us to identify any unnecessary steps or stages of the process where we could provide the user with with more clarification, just to help smooth the ticket reporting process along. And once we'd audited our existing sites and existing content, we separated out the content that was required on Contensis.com or could be migrated over from that which would stay on Zengenti.com or ZenHub in the case of documentation for classic Contensis features. We started to list out the required pages for the site. And then from this work, we started to map out an IA, create an initial IA, a draft in a Google Sheet, which we kept updated throughout the project. So you can see there are various different drafts. As we made amends, we kept a record of each one. And there was a certain amount of assumption involved in the initial IA work, and we were aware that due to our roles within Zengenti, we'd have pretty strong preconceptions when it comes to the way people access help and support for Contensis. Obviously, it's something we work with every day, and whilst most of you work with it every day, you can't just go and ask the product team or somebody for help. So we were quite wary of our preconceptions influencing the user journeys on the new site. So we knew it was important to carry out some user research on key areas, key user journeys, such as the IA and the help desk system. So we created TreeJack tests using a tool called Optimal Workshop, using that initial information architecture. And we sent emails to some of you who volunteered for user testing in the past and asked if you'd like to help test this new IA. We sent out a MailChimp invite. And the test took users through some of the key user journeys that we envisaged. And it asked you to find the appropriate content from a really basic mock-up of our menu. And we got some great feedback from this that really helped us to confirm the final navigation. So thank you very much to everybody that took part. But we don't just have an external audience here for our content, our help and docs. We use those articles internally a lot as well when we're working on projects. So we also spoke to users in our own teams to learn how people were using the documentation and the help desk. And when it came to the help desk, we spoke to members of the support team in particular to determine the minimum amount of information that they needed to resolve a ticket so that we could speed that process up without making more work for them, you know, so we could cut questions out of the help desk form. But if those pieces of information that we were removing were essential to resolving a ticket, then they were just going to hold things up. So it was really important to find out what we could remove and what needed to stay in there. And we also asked our internal users how they were using the help desk to get support when they were working on internal projects as well. So while us content strategists and designers were busy with user research and content prototypes, the developers on the team were also busy getting existing content ready to move to the new site. Some members of the team began by converting the existing hard-coded Contensis landing pages, the ones that we'd updated on Zengenti.com, into individual components in a tool called Storybook. I think John's going to cover Storybook later in his part of the webinar, but it essentially provides an environment for creating and testing individual front-end components. So developers can use it to see how components behave with different content and even hook up components to APIs to start sampling real content from live systems and then work on those components in isolation. It's something we'd really recommend because creating your components in this way means you can start development before you finalize any content models. And then the components in your design system can be built while you're getting everything else ready for your project. We also started content modeling at this stage. We wanted to begin importing content that we were simply going to reuse, such as the user guides and API docs from ZenHub. And we did this because we wanted to work with real content as much as possible throughout the project, rather than using lorem ipsum for wireframes. In particular, we wanted to import the user guides and start prototyping the navigation for those quite early on. We identified that was going to be quite a big piece of work, and importing all of the articles at the start of the project meant that we could start setting up the site structure in Contensis and then testing that with real content using the prototypes that we've developed. So you can see this content types for an article from the user guide section, and it's obviously quite a large composer with components that we've built to store the different types of content, such as alerts and callouts, code snippets. There's a component for storing CodePen embeds as well, all the things that make up our user documentation. Then once we'd imported all of that, we were able to use an early version of SiteView. It hadn't actually been released at this point. It was still a beta feature that our product team were testing. But we got hold of it. We were put on a pre-release version of Contensis and started trying it out. We actually were able to provide quite a lot of feedback to the product team as a result of this. Things like the move button that allows you to rearrange parent and child nodes in SiteView were as a result of work that we were doing as we changed the IA around once we'd imported it into SiteView and discovered that there was no easy way to do that. So it was quite a valuable process using this very early sort of beta feature that hadn't been released publicly yet. And once we gathered enough research to tell us we were on the right track, we actually began creating and designing prototypes. Based on his research into the help desk user journey, Gabriel created content priority guides for each step of the process. So for anybody not familiar with these, they're sort of a way of avoiding creating wireframes. You use real content to create quite a simple prototype of a page or screen, and they give the designer quite a lot of leeway in how they work with the content, but they generally prioritize the content in order of importance. So the top will be the most crucial piece of content, and then as you go down the priority guide, it becomes less important. And there's obviously no layout or styling involved in these. They're just text documents, which we then pass on to the design team, Martin and Margarita, who gradually turn these into high fidelity wireframes and prototypes in Figma that we could begin testing. We use Figma throughout the services team now because it enables close collaboration between teams of designers and developers. It was designed from the ground up to work with the kind of design systems that we create now at Zengenti. So you create a design system with your colors, fonts, different components. And then as you start using those to build screens in Figma, you can make any changes in one place. So you update the master design system, and those changes will roll out to all of the screens that you've designed using those components. It's a web app as well, so anybody can use it. There's no need to download it. There's no licensing. As long as somebody's got permission, they can access the resources, which means that developers can go in and grab any assets that they need for development. And it's really easy actually to download and resize those elements when you need them. And once again, we were keen to test and get some real world feedback on these prototypes. So we used a tool called Useberry. Useberry integrates with a lot of popular design tools to allow you to create user tests from Sketch, InDesign, or Figma files. So we'd actually linked our Figma files together to create clickable prototypes that we then shared with some of you using Newsbury to get some feedback. And as a result of the tests, we changed several aspects of the help desk that we designed initially, in particular the linked ticket functionality, which we'd struggled over when we were designing, and we were really unsure about. And the testing came back, and the results showed that people found the solution that we'd come up with quite confusing. And that was something that when we then tested with internal users, we found again. So we had to go back to the drawing board on that bit of functionality and really take our time over it. So that testing really paid off. It was a really useful thing to do, and something that we'd encourage everybody to do on projects. As I mentioned in the previous section, we'd initially started to rebuild the Contensis pages on Zengenti.com without redesigning them. But in order to avoid rebuilding Contensis in one big bang release, the product team eventually decided to introduce an interim redesign of Contensis, which meant our pages would look out of date soon after we launched Contensis.com. That interim release, that interim design, is Contensis 14, so it came out quite recently. And back when this decision was made, we decided to go back to the drawing board and design these Contensis marketing pages again from scratch in close collaboration with the product team. So you can see the kind of components that we had on those older designs on Zengenti.com on the left compared with Contensis 14 on the right. And then here you can see the kind of UI illustration that exists on the new Contensis.com site. So it's not an exact replica, it's kind of an artistic interpretation, but it's a lot better representation than what we had before. And we were able to do this because in Figma, we linked our components for our screens in our design system to the ones being developed by the product team. So as the product team were playing around, exploring new colors, fonts, and other elements of their early redesign, our designs were being automatically updated at the same time. So by keeping communication channels open, our designers were able to talk to the folks in the product team who are working on this, and as soon as something was locked in and they'd made a final decision on what that particular component would look like, we were able to start developing it. And because we were working with prototyping the individual components in Storybook, we could update our components without too much lost development time. So you can see here is one of the, this is a call to action component from the older Contensis marketing page on Zengenti.com. And then here's one from Contensis.com. So the front-end devs on our team were quite quickly able to update that and make the change in Storybook without too much lost time. When we started designing Contensis.com, we had anticipated that we'd probably have to update the designs once the new Contensis app was ready. So pivoting like this saved us work in the long run, and it means that the site is more future-proof and allows us to carry on focusing on making subtle updates and adding new functionality instead of anticipating a larger overhaul of key pages at some point. And if anything, we think we probably abandoned the old designs too late, and we should have failed faster, failed earlier, and could have saved some time in the long run from doing that, I think. When it came to landing pages that didn't currently exist, so pages that we'd identified that were required, but we hadn't already got copies of on Zengenti.com, we created basic content prototypes like this one for the Contensis homepage. So these are a bit more sort of closely specified than the priority guides I just showed you. They do have an element of structure to them, but they make it quite easy to get key pages, landing pages signed off copy-wise and structure-wise before handing them off to a developer. And they give the designers real content to work with, which speeds up their workflow. Martin and Margarita fed back that they found these really sped up the whole design process. And then you can see that content prototype turned into a design in Figma. So at this point, I'm going to hand you over to John, and John's going to take you through how we went about building one of these things. I'll just stop sharing for you, John.
Thank you. Right. Start that. Everyone see the screen? Yep, nodding good. Okay, thank you. Right. So yeah, I'm just going to go into a little bit more depth about the build process and how we developed in an agile way using content types and entries and Contensis. And one of the first decisions we had to make was our general approach. So what we wanted to do was to use purely content types and entries, no sort of classic WYSIWYG pages. And then we also wanted to develop a standalone app and just purely use Contensis as a content store and then pull in the content using the new Contensis APIs. And the reason we wanted to do it that way was because it would allow us to be a bit more agile in the sense that we could iterate on the app and the content models independently. In terms of the technology stack, we had a mixture of .NET and JavaScript developers in the team. And after a bit of discussion, we decided to go with the JavaScript approach. And from a framework point of view, we chose React. Now, although we took the JavaScript approach, we could have chosen another framework such as Vue or Angular, but there are a couple of reasons why React made sense for us as a team. The first of which was we didn't have to start from scratch. So as I mentioned, our professional services team had been developing in React. They'd also developed a base package. So some of the functionality, such as getting things like menus and the actual entry information, that was sort of already all handled for us. Whereas had we gone down a route of, say, using something like .NET Razor pages, we would have been starting from scratch and might potentially still be developing now. Just as a slight side note, that base package has been used to create a starter project, which we're hoping to make available in the next couple of weeks or so. And we're also hoping to do more examples as well in other languages. So we are hoping to do examples of working in this way using languages such as .NET and PHP. But another reason why we chose React was there is a big community around React. So it is an established framework. There are lots of sort of packages to use to help with building your sites and development processes, and also examples. It's also used by some fairly large companies such as Airbnb and Netflix, so quite high volume traffic sites as well. So it was a good tried and tested framework. And React has been very much designed with a component-based approach in mind. So that obviously fitted in with the way we'd done all the designs in Figma, and then also prototyped the standalone components. With Storybook, it just made everything flow and fit together nicely. And it also supported or supports what's termed isomorphic rendering. And that essentially means that the app can run on client side. So I can just run it locally on my local machine, just using pure JavaScript, and I can easily debug any issues and make any changes. But then also it can also run server side. So what that actually means is that the JavaScript is pre-compiled on the server, and then what gets sent to the browser is just the raw compiled HTML, which means that the site can easily be picked up by search engines, and SEO was going to be a key thing for us both now and going forward as well. Just some more general benefits of working in this way in terms of improving our developer workflow overall. As I mentioned, we developed a standalone app. This again is hosted in source control, so none of the code is in Contensis, and it's just simply consuming the APIs from Contensis, so there's no sort of direct link as such to the CMS. And we've also been able to provide a great user experience for customers without duplicating any code. So when we first started working with React, we were actually still using Razor views and classic web pages. And what we were finding was we would write something like a news listing. We'd do that as a C# Razor view first, and then we'd near enough have to write the exact same code, but in JavaScript to provide that app-like interactive experience. Whereas for this project, we just wanted to use a single language and do the code once. It was also going to be easy and quicker for us to push changes between dev and live environments. So I mentioned I can develop locally. I could then commit my code to source control. There was some continuous integration in the background, which pushed that code to a container. So there was a version of the app on a development URL, which we could give to other people in the team and other members of Zengenti as well. And then once we were happy, we could simply mark that version of the code as being the release version. And then within about a minute or so, that's then deployed to the what would eventually become the live site. In contrast, last week I was doing some work on ZenHub actually, and I did it in dev first, and I ended up with a document or a Google Doc of about 14 different items of Razor views and templates that I'd have to copy and paste stuff across for and publish in a certain order. So it is a much faster, smoother experience developing in this way. And also did provide improved collaboration as well. So we were working with a universal language in terms of JavaScript. So there was none of this front-end and back-end developers almost working independently. We were all one team, and everyone was able to contribute really. And just on that collaboration, this is just an example of some of the commits that we made. You can see here there's about 4 of us working and all committing code, and we were just able to release periodically, no issues in terms of code being checked in and checked out. A couple of guys you can see here are actually new starters. This was their first project, and within the first week, we were able to get them up to speed and actually committing code. So it's much easier development experience. And I mentioned about improved workflow. So I said all this code is in source control. We use GitLab for a couple of reasons. So some of them it provides a nice UI for us. We've got continuous integration built in. People like Ryan can actually do the releases without needing to have a developer like myself on hand. Ryan's even been able to contribute as well by making some little changes to the app in terms of things like the pricing page and the footer as well. Now, you could use something like GitHub. You can use any other sort of source control system. For no sort of restrictions. From our side, in that respect, it was just we felt GitLab worked best for us. So as I mentioned, a lot of our code started off as a component in Storybook, which allowed us to sort of easily map the individual components in Figma into a variety of different individual standalone components. Storybook, we can actually push it to its own container and give it its own URL. So as well as developers being able to see these components, we were able to let other members of Zengenti have a play with the components and just see how they would look and behave with different content and different layout options, and get feedback and iterate on that feedback before we'd even touched React, in that sense. And as I mentioned, a lot of this, because we were working in this agile component-based way, a lot of these tasks were happening in parallel. So while some of the developers were building these components, some of us, including myself, are working on more of the content integration side, and we're trying to, all those 4 products that I mentioned, really try and get all the content together in one place. And one of the areas we started off looking at almost straight away was the documentation side. So again, as Ryan mentioned, we were able to, from a very early stage of a project, really start to model the documentation and start importing that from Gitbooks. So to actually import and sync this content, we actually built a Node.js application. Again, since we were writing the actual app in React and JavaScript, we felt it would make sense to use the keep the technology stack similar and familiar. And again, that just allowed more people to be able to contribute to the project. And we were actually also able to use the Contensis management API JavaScript. So the Contensis JavaScript management API, put my teeth in order to import all this content as well, which was quite a nice experience. And again, because we have got the standalone app and model and the content models are separate, we were actually able, towards the end of the project, work with the product team to iterate on the documentation. So the HTTP documentation is actually curated and stored solely in Contensis.com, whereas the JavaScript and .NET APIs are still synced from Gitbooks. But we were able to actually use the some of the existing components as well as create a couple of other ones. But that kind of iteration was fairly simple for us to do, again, because again, everything is to a certain extent decoupled. And then we were also able to sync some of the company information we have on our customers from our CRM, and that we needed for things like the blogs and case study sections. But we were also able to enrich that information where we needed to. So some fields like the name and company profile, we were pulling that from the CRM still, but there were some other fields that we added for information that we wanted just for Contensis.com. We actually also at one point had set this up as a real-time sync. So in terms of being able to make use of Rabbit, which is our messaging framework or service, so we could hook in to say when an entry was updated in the CRM, we could also update the corresponding entry in Contensis.com, and also as well actually Zengenti.com. We're actually working on, as part of the next release of Contensis, what we're calling an events API, which will allow you as customers to have a documented way you've been able to hook into things like when an entry is updated. So you'll be able to do things like this yourself as well. You can do it today to a certain extent, but it does need a little bit of input from us. But you'll soon have a documented way of doing it. And then also the help desk as well. So as well as improving the user experience of raising a ticket, we wanted to improve the experience of actually interacting with the ticket as well. And we were largely able to do this using the existing web services. Because we were working with JavaScript, we were able to provide a better user experience in terms of being able to let you do things like change the impact level of tickets, add people to be able to receive notifications about a ticket, and also to do reply to tickets as well more easily. And you might notice you can see my face in a lot of places on this ticket. So we wanted to create a more personal experience for our customers. So we've built, again, using Node and JavaScript, an avatar service. So this uses a combination of the Slack API and our new security API for managing users and groups, which I'll touch on more in a second, in order to try and grab someone's avatar. And we've done this in a generic way. So if any of you are interested in using this in any of your projects, just let us know and we can easily help get that up and running for you. And again, just in terms of providing more personal experience, working with a product team as well, we were able to sort of test the new security API and suggest sort of any improvements and give feedback. And now you've got the ability to update things like your name and phone number through Contensis.com. This is using the new security API. And it opens up the door really for us to do more in the future. So we are going to be looking at adding some additional options for you on this screen. So as I mentioned, we've predominantly used content types and entries, but we also made heavy use of site view as well in order to link everything together. So what I'm just going to take you through now really is a little bit of a live demo of how the Contensis.com itself works and how everything fits together and where everything lives. So this is the CMS for Contensis.com, and what you're looking at is the site view tree. Some of you may or may not have seen this before. Essentially, site view is a tree of nodes, and at the moment you can attach an entry to a node, and that basically gives that entry a URL or a home. It also is where you define the information architecture and hierarchy for your content within your applications as well. And as I mentioned, we use purely content types and entries. So we have got a whole variety of different types of content in here. So we've got blogs, for example, which is, I guess, your more traditional structured content with a hero section, the author, and then a series of text and video blocks. We've also, as mentioned, got all of our documentation in here as well. So we have all of the API documentation, some of which, as mentioned, is still synced from Gitbook. Some of it is curated here in Contensis.com. And in terms of if I wanted to add a new URL to a section, perhaps, so under authoring here, just to show you how it works very quickly, I can simply add a new node, say how to create an entry. Now, at the moment, this URL doesn't have any content attached to it, so it won't actually render or show anything. So what I can do here is I can either create a new entry and attach it to this node, or I can add an existing piece of content. So if I say, yeah, here we are, how to create an entry, and then I can immediately preview that. So again, you can see this is the documentation section, which has got a different look and feel to the blog article that you just saw. On the left-hand side here, we've got this a menu as well, and this is pulled in from SiteView itself. And we've been able to, again, do things like have the dark theme as well. And then finally, again, different type of content again. This is more of a landing page now with your hero and sort of these big feature blocks. So really with Contensis, we were able to, in effect, store any type of content we needed to and give it a URL. And we've even got things like we've got general content pages in here as well. So SiteView really gives us the ability to give any piece of content a URL. And now the developer in me couldn't go through this whole presentation without showing you some code. So what I actually want to do is just, in effect, go a bit behind the curtain, so to speak here, and just show you how we actually get this information out of SiteView using our APIs. And these are the API calls that we actually make within that base package and on Contensis.com. So what you're looking at now is Postman, which is just a tool that developers can use for making and testing API calls. So in terms of if I just want to get an individual node from SiteView, all I need to do really is grab the URL that someone's put into their browser, and I can feed that into our Nodes API, and it will give me back the node from SiteView, so its path. And I can also request things like children if I wanted to do a menu on my left-hand side, for example, like you saw on the documentation section. And I can also get parents and ancestors as well if I wanted to produce, say, a breadcrumb, for example. But you'll also notice that here, because there's an entry attached, it's just giving me the GUID or the ID, which isn't perhaps particularly useful or means I have to make another API call. So what we've also introduced in the Nodes API is the ability to say, I want to get back the entry information that's attached to this node. So here, this is saying entry fields equals star, which is basically everything. So as well as bringing back the content of this entry, things like the title and hero, it also gives me information about the entry itself, so such as when it was published. And perhaps most importantly, I can get back the what's called the content type that the entry was created from. And really what that allows us to do is, behind the scenes in the app, what we do is we make this API call. We then, if you like, store the entry within the context of the application. And then in terms of how we handle the routing in our React JavaScript app, again, this is just one way of doing it. There are a number of different ways. What we have is, if you like, a content type mappings file. So we basically say, if the content type ID of the entry I've just fetched from site view is a blog post, then load this particular component or template. So then you can see we've got all the different components that make up a blog post. So you've got the metadata information, things like the hero sections, author area, related content. We're also using schema.org to provide Google with some rich snippets, but I just sort of wanted to show you really how we can easily make everything fit together in terms of being able to store content with content types and entries in site view, but also easily render it any way you want to within your applications as well. So once we've done all this wonderful, amazing development work and got all the pages and content ready, it was time to actually launch this into the wild. So Ryan's now just going to take you through that process just very quickly. So if I stop sharing.
Thanks, John. Okay. I think so I'll wrap up quite quickly. In terms of the test and the launch, as I mentioned, we'd developed these 3 sub-projects fairly separately with a mind to release whichever one was finished first independently. But we eventually decided to release the 3 projects at the same time as one finished product. So the reasons for that were mostly down to that pivot that we made on the designs that delayed the project slightly, pushed the launch back, as well as some other things we had to wait for in the product from the product development team, such as the security API that we used. We initially released Contensis.com as a beta product, so for the first few weeks it was available to internal users only. We asked our teams to report any issues that they came across while they were working with it, and then we rolled it out publicly. We made it live, and we put notices on ZenHub to let people know that they could find documentation on Contensis.com now, but the Contensis Classic documentation would remain on ZenHub. And we gave people the option of using the new help desk on Contensis.com, but for a while we kept the old original help desk live, and people could move between whichever one they preferred. We opened up a feedback channel on the Contensis Slack as well, so that people could report any issues they found, and then we fixed these as they came along. And keeping the old platforms live for a while just reduced a lot of the stress associated with go live. It wasn't so much of a difficult decision to push the button, make Contensis.com public, knowing that if anything happened, people could still get help and support through the old sites. In terms of where we go now with this, I mean, this was a big project. It took 12 months in the end, a lot longer than we anticipated at the beginning. It involved 17 squad members, not all at the same time. People came in and out. We kind of had a core team that worked on it throughout, but we also had people join us for a few weeks at a time and then go off onto other projects, which meant in total it was around 500 person days, start to finish, to complete the project, and 100 of those days were before we made that decision to abandon the initial designs and create new ones more in line with the redesigned Contensis app. And from now on, we're not going to be simply maintaining the project, but we're going to be actively working on it, moving it forward, improving it. We scaled the original squad back. We've now got a core team of 4 people to keep progressing things, but we bring people in as and when needed. As people leave other projects, they might join us if we've got work for them, or we'll borrow people from other squads for a couple of days a week or something like that, just when they're required. Some of the things we're hoping to add in the near future include a new way for users, for all of you to register for a new help desk account and manage your account information and notification settings. We're going to add a webinar and events area. Obviously, with the current situation around the world, we're not holding any physical events, but we're hoping to put all of the webinar recordings there for you to view in your own time. And eventually they'll become a home for any actual events that we have. And we're still working on introducing a free trial of Contensis on the site. So that won't initially be signing up for an actual Contensis instance, but it'll be a way of accessing a demo environment to try Contensis out. And we're hoping to carry on working closely with the product team to try new features before they're released. There are a couple of things that we're using at the moment that aren't publicly available, and that's something that's been really useful for both us and the product team, so we're keen to keep that going.